Hey everyone, you're listening to the Active Turnkey podcast, a podcast designed for hands-off, passive real estate rental investors. In the Active Turnkey podcast, you'll hear Tom Olson and Jared Stoltmeister discuss all things turnkey rentals with other turnkey providers, service providers, and rental investors. Our goal is to help you reach your financial freedom and whatever comes after that. Let's go. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Active Turnkey podcast. I'm your host, Jared Stoltmeister, and I have with me the Tom Olson. And we are back with the Active Turnkey series.
I'm just here for the ride today.
That's right. And Tom's going to be quiet. He's just going to sit there, and we'll see how long he can go here. I don't believe he can make it.
Jared doesn't believe it.
I don't believe he can make it.
I see you though.
There's just too much. He desires to bring you value. Too much to sit there and just not say anything.
I mean, I can if you want me to.
No, I think
you think people want to hear today?
I think people want to hear Tom's perspective.
They want to hear.
If you're on the show, they want to hear you.
I don't know.
They do.
I don't know.
Okay, I believe.
I want to hear some comments if that's really the truth or not. So post below.
Post below, please.
Email Jared.
Yes.
Follow, like, 5 stars. 5 stars if you want to hear me.
Mm-hmm. That way we'll know.
Yeah, we'll know.
We'll know for
Give
sure.
Give us some 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts.
If our 5 stars
follow,
go
like,
up.
subscribe, tell your friends and family about us. Come to our Real Estate Free For All event. That's coming up. If you're local here to Northwest Indiana, we also have a meetup group every single month. We haven't talked about that much. And we also have free investor calls where you can be on the call with experts that I have from around the country, and you can ask questions. And I'm telling you, super valuable. If you haven't watched any of them yet, go to the website, bidsuccess.com, and they're all on there. All the previous ones are on there. I even have some crypto ones for all of you kryptonites out there that think that crypto is the next best thing. And I've got one. We talked about gold. We've talked about real estate. What's going on in real estate? If you want to be on those calls, let us know. Get on the list for those calls. We have them every single month.
I told you guys. He cannot.
Full of value today.
He cannot help but bring value.
All right, Jared.
That's Tom.
What are we going to talk about today?
So today we're going to continue our series on the Active Turnkey series, and the first several episodes were about the desk assessment. We're just evaluating the deal on paper, checking it out, make sure it all makes sense. Now we're at the property. The first one at the property, we would say this is the property assessment. We've done the curb appeal. Last podcast we talked about the layout, and does the layout matter? And in this case, we're going to talk about more or less creating a rough repair estimate.
Okay, yeah.
Now, we already kind of did that before, but in this case, you're at the property now. You're actually seeing the differences and the things that the pictures didn't show you. And so you more or less want to try to confirm what you had on the desk assessment, because it's never going to be exactly the same.
So the last 2 episodes, we talked about things like curb appeal. We talked about things like the layout on the outside, layout on the inside. And so we've already assessed that. Those are kind of more of assessments in your mind as you're at the property, right? Now we're going to actually put pen to paper, and we're not going to get into the super, super nitty gritty, because we did already talk about this in a previous podcast. And if you didn't get that podcast, you can go back. I'm not sure exactly what podcast that is. Maybe Amelia can put that in the comments about which podcast that was that we talked about that full rehab estimate. But I will tell you, as I'm pulling up to the property and I'm going to do a rehab estimate, the first thing I'm going to look at is the outside of the house.
Sure.
As soon as I get there, before I'm even out of my car, I'm looking at things like the roof. I'm looking at the soffit fascia. I'm looking at the siding. I'm looking at the windows. I'm looking at the landscaping. I'm looking at the driveway. I'm looking at the lot. I'm looking at is the backyard full of a bunch of garbage? This does happen, folks.
Yep.
I don't know why, but people sometimes believe that it's their duty to leave as much garbage as they possibly can at a property when they leave and they get kicked out. I don't know. Foreclosures aren't as much that way, because it seems like a lot of times the banks will come in and they'll clean up that stuff. But so I'm looking at all those things. I'm looking at the garage. Does the garage need a roof? Does the garage need a new garage door? Does the garage need siding or windows or doors? Does the fence need repaired? So those are kind of the main things on the outside of a property. The only other thing I would kind of look at is does it need grading? We talked about grading a little bit on the last episode. And also, is there a well and septic? Am I going to have to maybe test the well, make sure the water's good? And am I going to have to possibly pump this septic? We always put it in one of our scopes when we're doing new active turnkeys, or when we're doing turnkeys ourselves, to try to make sure that we pump those ourselves. That is something that you're going to have to kind of look at on a short-term basis and on a long-term basis, because you are going to have those things pumped about every 2 years, at least up in our area. I do have some properties down in Pensacola, and those don't seem to be needing as pumped as much. I think it's because there's a lot of sand down there. They seem to have a little bit less problems from my experience so far. Up here, there's a lot of clay, so a lot of that clay, sometimes it's hard to filter some of those septic systems. So those are some things I'd be looking at in the outside. Anything else, Jared, I missed?
Yeah, you want to pay attention also to safety things. So like if there's a sidewalk or there are trip hazards on the driveway or the sidewalk, those will always come up in inspection. So if you're looking to sell or if you're looking to place a tenant and you're trying to get away from liability there, you want to protect yourself from that. Make sure that steps are up to code. Are the front steps proper? These are line items and they're not cheap, depending on how you're going to get it done. Do they need to be mud jacked, the sidewalk or the steps? Or are you going to build a front steps? Are the railings up to code? And are there other items like, are there, you may have gutters that are there, but do you have downspouts and do you have extensions? They're all going to cost money. You don't want water. He's already talking about grading. Grading doesn't mean anything if you just have a downspout emptying out right at the corner of the foundation, which is typically where you see water intrusion. So these are all things that you need to write down. It's going to be a line item. The contractor's not going to do it for free, and the material's going to cost you money. Yeah, absolutely. So you want to make sure you have those on yours.
Yeah, and he brought up a good point even with gutters themselves. It's interesting, and I didn't realize this, Jared, but in some parts of the country, these gutters are still not like on every single house. And I was really shocked when I went to Pensacola. And most of the houses don't have gutters. And I was like, huh? Some of them will actually have a gutter right over the front steps when you walk in. And I was like, okay, this is a little weird. Yeah. But it's very normal for them. And I realized, and I asked some questions, that they don't have basements. We have basements. It matters a lot more if you have gutters on your property, if you have a basement, if you don't have a basement. Yep. So gutters. Also, like we talked about windows, but a lot of times we like to put shutters on our houses to give them some extra curb appeal and to give them some things. And then also, at least for a rental, we're talking about rentals here, we like to put at least some mulch down if it makes sense, and if there's places where it looks like, hey, there is some. We don't like to do massive landscaping projects and bring in big timbers or bring in big rocks or bring stone. Like we really just like to put down some mulch, and that might cost you $600-800 on a property. So those are kind of the main things. Exterior doors is probably the last thing that I don't think I've mentioned, but those are things that on the outside of the property that we're going to look at and you'd want to look at as well.
Well, here he already mentioned the siding. You want to pay attention to that. Can it be saved? Are there holes? You got to fill them. If it's brick, does it need to be tuck pointed? If the siding looks bad, can you paint it? How much is that going to cost? Same thing with roof. All these different things. We kind of alluded to that, but you want to get all these numbers and you want to make sure you have a good idea about what that cost is going to be. But start nailing down those numbers and honing in that original price you had for the exterior stuff. Then we'll go inside.
So now we're walking inside the door, right, Jared? And this is where all the fun begins. A lot of people think, kitchens and bathrooms, that's where all the money's at. That's where you spend a lot of your money. And that's where a lot of the value's at. So, for us, we don't always do new cabinets. I'm going to be honest with you. If the old cabinets are in decent shape and they're usable and they look good the way they are, or they could look good with a good coat of good paint, we do use like a little bit more expensive trim paint on those cabinets. Then that's fine. But we always want to do quartz or granite countertops in all of our houses. I'm going to tell you, to me, it's one of the keys,
it's almost
at least in our area, for making more money on your rentals. And honestly, I think helping the community and helping the tenant have a better experience. We also normally are going to replace most of the lights or the fans inside. So let's start with cosmetic, and then we'll get into some of the mechanicals later. So cosmetic-wise, we do also like vinyl plank. Occasionally, we'll put carpet and maybe some commercial carpet in a basement. Maybe we'll paint the basement floor, but we do like hard surface flooring. I think it lasts longer. I think the tenants like it better. They stay cleaner. They're easier to clean on turnover. There's so many reasons why to spend a little bit more money on that upfront thing there too. Paint is another big deal. We normally will paint our walls and ceilings agreeable gray. That's a very standard off-white color that has just been popular for many, many years. We may change it at some point, but right now that's where we're at. In Florida, we've already changed it to like a light, super light off-white green, blue, whatever, aqua type of color. Sea salt type of color.
Yeah, I like that.
But up here it's mostly agreeable gray. That's what it is. Our trim is just a basic white on doors, trim, and all that. And then as what else cosmetic wise, I'm trying to think, kitchens and bathrooms. We really, like I said, we like the quartz countertops. We like to do some kind of tile backsplash. Our cabinets, we like to put some kind of knobs on. And we do like, obviously you're gonna have to have a little bit more expensive, decent faucet in the kitchen because you're using granite. We also like to swap out the bathroom faucets if we possibly can. Sometimes the old handle faucets you can't get parts for those, and they can be problematic over the years. Plus, they can be too hot or too cold. So like we do like, if we can, to change those, and we really also don't like putting in just normal cheap. I know a lot of people for rentals will put those really cheap bathroom tub surrounds in, and we really like to put a nice decent tile when we think it's going to last longer. We think it's going to get you more value, and we think things are going to help. Obviously, you got the obvious things like your toilets and your vanities and your mirrors and lights and all those things. But so now we can get into some things that people don't think about as much, and that for us is basements. Basements I think always add money to these projects. Oh, one more thing I want to mention in the kitchen, I really do prefer that we supply, that you supply, I supply appliances, at least your major ones like your stove and your refrigerator. Most of the time, I'd even lean towards a microwave instead of a range. Instead of just a range hood, but sometimes a range hood is appropriate. And sometimes dishwashers, we don't really push dishwashers much in rentals. We seem to have more problems with them than not. Sometimes rentals have them, sometimes they don't. But then get into the basement. So basements, we don't always finish basements. Sometimes we do. And if you're going to finish a basement, obviously you're going to try to, do some things and make sure that it's going to be dry possibly and kind of look through that. But framing could be an issue. Drywall, you might have some insulation you might want to do. And then wiring, all that stuff can be rough. You're basically adding square footage to a property. If you want to add if you're going to add a bathroom in the basement, that can be problematic if it's not already there. So that can cost you, quite a bit of money. And really, it's important for us to have licensed contractors do the work on these properties. We kind of look at it almost like it's a little bit of an insurance program, because now the city has come out and they have actually approved what you've done. And if they don't like something, they can tell you at that point. And if they don't, it's kind of like a third opinion of saying, hey, the city's signed off on this and this is good to go.
Absolutely.
Basements also, you do need to pay attention to things like in our areas, bowing walls. Water pressure is what is causing that. And so there are some ways to fix those foundations and fix those things without costing a ton of money, but they are going to cost money if you do have to kind of settle those. It's interesting. I've had lots of engineers look at those over the years, or normally it's either a structural engineer that will come out, look at it, or maybe an architect or somebody that has that kind of a license. And I hear that every single time. I don't think I've ever heard an engineer not say this. And they always tell me when there's a bowing wall, it could have been that way for the last 50 years. Right. It could be that way for the next 50 years. It really is the truth too. You don't know. It may have just happened. It could have been like that way for 50 years. So you really don't know. It's not something that I would say is a killer, but it's something that you probably want to address. You probably want to make sure that if there is a major bowing wall, there's some kind of support that's added to it. It's not really structural. People think it's structural. It's really more foundation. There's kind of a difference. There's a difference between your foundation work and your structural work, but you can add structural integrity to it. The structural things that you might want to look at in the basement are things like your rim joists. You might want to look to see if there's termite damage. We just had a house we had to replace half of the basement's floor joists. Yes. So it's just really a matter of looking everywhere and kind of making sure that everything is good to go. And then you kind of get into the mechanics, right? So the major mechanics are electrical, plumbing, and HVAC, right? Yep. So electrical, obviously the big things are, hey, does this even have a panel? Sometimes they still have the old knob and tube wiring. That's another big thing that can cost you a lot of money. But sometimes they'll have the old panels that don't even have breakers on them. And then the other thing, even if it does have breakers on them, in our area, there's a lot of those 50s, 60s type houses that have the old Wadsworth panels. And that's something that is also going to have to be replaced at some point as well. And if you don't replace them, every time one of those breakers goes out, it's going to cost you a couple $100 because those are getting very hard to find nowadays. Electrical, that's what I would think about. Plumbing. If it does have steel pipes inside, I don't think you always have to replace them, but you definitely want to, consider that. I prefer PEX over copper. Copper was a thing for many, many years, and people have kind of learned that PEX is actually a better product. I think it swells better in the wintertime and summertime, and you don't have as many issues with it, honestly, with it sweating and that kind of stuff. And also, people don't steal it. So there's no reason for somebody to come in and steal your PEX, but there is a incentive for people to come in and steal copper. We haven't had that issue happen, honestly, in a long, long time, maybe 20 years. Yeah. It's been since I've heard people coming in and stealing even copper. But I think it's because people aren't looking for that as much anymore. When it comes to that. So plumbing is that. And then also your drain lines. Old steel lines can also, be problematic. They may need more rotting throughout from time to time. If you can afford it, consider maybe adding, switching those over to PVC. But plumbing is that. And then plumbing is also trim plumbing as well. So there's a trim plumb and there's a rough plumbing as well. And then lastly, with mechanicals, is HVAC. My preference is and always has been and will be to have even AC, full air and HVAC for heat and for cooling. And it's interesting because up north here, we're not required to do that as a landlord. In the South, you actually are. So in the South, you're not required to have heat. But up here, you're required to have heat, and it has to be at least 66 degrees, I think, in the wintertime is the requirements that we have. Obviously, anybody's going to have that. But if it's a boiler, it might be a new boiler. It may last you for 50 years, and it may be an old boiler. It might need to be replaced. Yeah. So, but switching from a boiler to an HVAC, system
it's a big deal.
Can be very costly. So it can be $10,000, $15,000 for a project like that. So those are kind of some of the main things. What are the costs you're seeing, Jared, for just swapping out maybe just a furnace or just an AC unit?
Well, depending on who you find, I mean, that's the other thing. You could find the wrong person, and you could find a guy who wants to give you a deal for cash.
Ooh, that's the guy you want every time.
It's a used.
Or a used furnace, yeah. He wants to sell you a used furnace and cash, and it's the best deal you've ever seen in your life. Okay, I'm not talking about that, Jared. Not that guy. And if you're that guy, that's not who we are. So just so you know, that's not what we're looking to do. So typically we're seeing what,
2,500. I would say 2,500 ballpark for a new furnace. Okay. You're probably going to be more like 3 to up to 3.5 for AC right now. That's what we've been seeing lately for AC units. And obviously, the bigger unit you get, the larger it'll need to be.
And if you do have to switch over from a boiler system to this, you also have to add in all of the ductwork and all the returns that have to go for that as well. So that's in addition to that. Correct. So not only is it $6,000, it's an additional. Who knows?
Yeah, like depending on the size of the house and
depend quite a bit.
Yeah, some other things to keep in mind. These are much smaller items, but they do cost money, and so we always rod every single property every time. Now, I have heard people who rod preventatively on an annual basis. Our licensed plumber doesn't recommend you do that, just because the in and out use constantly might actually hurt the line over time. You're better off rodding it when you need to after you do the initial rodding. That's something to think about. You want to make sure that you have insulation. That's something that comes up in the attic, so check the attic. And you want to make sure that there's proper venting in the attic that will come up, because if it's not properly vented, you could get mold over time, and mold's if you have a tenant in place, that's going to be an issue. So you do want to check for mold or any kind of sign of mold. That's something you want to check right away, and it is a line item. You'll want to check. Now, one thing we do is we typically replace all of our outlets, switches, all that stuff, to make sure it's nice and new and clean and neat. You'll do this beautiful paint, and you got old, crusty outlets and switches. So we often
you don't want to paint over them, Jared?
Yeah, some people do. It's really interesting, but we don't recommend it. So we typically change those out. And then lastly, anytime there's any kind of bathroom shower, we always put exhaust fans in. They do tend to have mold, but we make sure that they're most homes we buy, a lot of them have exhaust fans.
Yes, they're just vented in the attic.
They're vented in the attic.
I don't know why.
Which oftentimes creates mold in the attic, and so we always require our contractors to make sure that
and we've
it's
learned
vented
this
outside.
honestly from just hard knocks, and for us not catching things like that. I mean, honestly, every single day we are trying to get better. I can tell you we're way better today than we were 5 years ago, 3 years ago. Like we're trying to add things to our own list.
Yeah.
And you're going to know this and this is kind of part of what we talked about on the guys' podcast we were on a couple weeks ago that we mentioned on the last podcast was, you can do everything yourself, and we're kind of trying to give you our knowledge about doing this all yourself, or you can work with a turnkey provider that you believe, like, and trust, and that you think that they're going to, work in your best interest. And that's what we do for people. We build rental portfolios for investors, and we want to help you reach financial freedom. And whatever that means for you, whether it's just to help your family, maybe you want to go on trips, maybe you want to be able to retire, maybe you want to be able to help an orphanage in Uganda, whatever it is, like, we want to be able to help you build your rental portfolios. And if we can be a help to you, please just let us know. If this has brought value to you, click subscribe, click like, follow us, give us the 5-star reviews that we've talked about. Tell your friends and family about us. We've got many different options for investors, but we would love to be a part of, maybe we're not all of it, but maybe we would just love to have the opportunity to be able to serve you and be able to steward your rental properties for you.
Yeah, we also do build rental portfolios for investors. So if you're looking to get started, you're looking to get in a second market, we can help you do that. You can reach me at jared@buyolsongroup.com, or you can reach us at buyolsongroup.com or onegroupnetwork.com. And so you can definitely do that. And also realize that we are doing a whole lot in Gary, Indiana. There's not too many people who are focusing in on areas like this. So our numbers are great. You're getting a gorgeous house. Do not think that if you're in a place like Gary, you're getting a D+ quality property or a D+ quality tenant. We're giving you qualified tenants in beautiful homes, what you would like to have in any kind of outside neighborhood. But we're also doing it in a place like Gary where there's a lot happening, a lot of great opportunities, and you do have an impact in the community. And so if you're interested in that, we can definitely help you have that social conscience piece to what you're trying to accomplish.
Love it.
Hope this brought you value. Active Turnkey.
The best way to buy rentals. God bless. We'll see you in the next one.
Olson Group Network makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice. Unless specifically stated otherwise, Olson Group Network does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. Any third-party materials or content of any third-party site referenced in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions, standards, or policies of Olson Group Network. Olson Group Network assumes no responsibility or liability for the accuracy or completeness of the content contained in third-party materials or on third-party sites referenced in this podcast, or the compliance with the applicable laws of such materials and/or links referenced herein.